This just happened this week. I was on vacation with my family and they were driving me insane after day 3. I decided maybe I'll take a look on Bumble and see if there were any cute locals to meet up with for an hour or two while my family went to more museums, which is not at all my interest. My friends at home also thought it would be a funny story to meet up with a local. For reference, I'm a 25-year-old female and I was with my parents and younger sister for a week. We were in a remotish area in a small town out west, visiting a lot of national parks, so there weren't a lot of people nearby on the apps. I started swiping and soon came across a guy who was my age and looked cute, had similar interests as me, so I felt like I would be down to meet up with him. We started talking on the app, then eventually moved to Snapchat. He suggested we go to the next town over, about 30 minutes away, to see the fireworks. I couldn't that night, since I had plans with my family, and I was also hesitant about meeting a guy 30 minutes away when I was already out of my element and we were in what felt like the middle of nowhere. He knew I was there to do hiking and park, so he suggested we go for a local hike nearby the next day. A lot of great hiking trails around here. Important side note, I deleted my last name on Snapchat before he added me, so he does not know it. I don't know if I had a bad feeling in the back of my mind or what, but I did not want him knowing much of my info. However, it did show his last name, which is important later. I had hesitations about going into the woods with a random guy, especially since I had been around the hiking trails the day before and my cell service was cutting in and out. But the trails were well populated, and I did want to see more out there, and my family was going to some museums that I had no interest in, so I agreed to meet him the next day. That night, I got a bad feeling and kept getting more nervous about meeting a random Bumble man from far away from home in an area I didn't know too well. Even though my family knew where I would be, I was feeling uncomfortable and decided maybe I should just Google this guy and see what other info I could find about him, like his Instagram or LinkedIn, etc., so I could give my family his info while I was gone in case anything happened. I also wanted to verify what I knew about him, like his workplace and alma mater, etc. Well, I type in his first and last name and the town we're in Google, and click on the first link. Next thing I know, I am looking at a registered sex offender profile with his full name, address, photo, description of his offense, etc., and it was fairly recent. I'm not sure if I can go into detail here about his offense, but I can assure you that had I not Googled this man, things could have turned out very, very badly for me. Or maybe not, but nonetheless, I'm shook that I almost met up with a registered sex offender. Please make sure to do your due diligence when meeting people off of the internet. Edit. I found out his full name because he added me on Snapchat. My family was okay with me meeting a random guy because I'm an adult and we had just been up to these well-populated hiking trails 2 days before and they track my location on their phones. Edit again. It didn't have a lot of detail about the offense he committed, but it said it was rape and the victim was an 18-year-old girl and it was a third-degree offense. This is all of the info that was available that I could find. I, a 27-year-old female, went backpacking alone over the recent long weekend, which was 10 out of 10 beautiful. The second night, I camped at a beautiful high-elevation lake, which could also be accessed by a short 1-mile trail, so there were a few other campers and several people who were just day hiking or fishing. It was late afternoon, and I was sitting around my camp reading when a guy, mid-20s, walked by carrying a fishing pole and a small cooler. I didn't think much of it, but 5 to 10 minutes later he doubled back and came and said hi. I said hi and went back to reading, but then without warning he sat down on a stump next to me. I was completely taken aback at this invasion of my space. He started asking me questions that were really just statements, but in a creepy, amused tone like, "So you're just reading," and then looked behind me and noticed my tent and said, "Oh, so you're staying the night here alone, huh?" I didn't say anything in response to this in particular, but it's obvious that I am. It's hard to explain, but his vibe was just really off. I was so uncomfortable that I couldn't even really form words or tell him I was trying to be alone and get him to leave. I was honestly paralyzed. His eyes were so dead and dark and just drilling into me. I just responded with like, uh-huhs, or yep, or something, and just tried to pretend I was still reading. Without warning, he pulls out and cracks a beer and lights a cigarette and just starts blowing it at me. At this point, I'm so uncomfortable and just not responding. Soon, another hiker wandered by, and he strikes up a conversation with him, and I took the opportunity to grab my water filter and bladder and pretend to need to get water. I went to the shore and filtered some water super slowly and saw him walk away to go sit with the new guy, which made me super relieved, except that he kept looking in my direction. I came back eventually and got inside my tent, and for 20 minutes everything was fine. I had the rain fly pulled back and was watching the sunset and loosely organizing my things when he popped out from behind my tent and stood maybe 1 foot from my door looking down at me. He didn't say anything, but just started laughing really creepily and fakely again. I asked, "What?" And his response was, "This is just really funny." I felt literally sick to my stomach and finally responded with something like, "I'm taking a nap now, so have a good night." He laughed again, but luckily left. Later, I saw him still wandering around the camp with no real purpose, still looking in my direction often. I had no service, but I wrote down his last name, at least what was written on his cooler, and where he said he was from while talking to the other hiker in my notes app just in case, and slept with my pocket knife close. I debated leaving camp that night, but ended up staying and just leaving super early in the morning in case he came back. Normally, while backpacking, I think the worst thing that could happen is I might run into a bear or sprain an ankle, and maybe this seems not that bad as you're reading it, but this truly was the most unsettling experience I've ever had in the backcountry. I'm sure I'll be back out soon, but hopefully somewhere far away from this dude. In the mid-90s, my dad was really big on auctions so he could resell stuff, mostly estate/storage liquidations. I was a college student and lived away from home but would humor him by joining him from time to time. This was before Craigslist was popular or any online selling platform really, so auctions at the time were very popular. I joined him to inspect an estate sale that was apparently from a deceased man's home in San Francisco. The auction house was packed with stuff and a ton of furniture. Since my dad was a VIP customer, he got to go to the pre-sale browses where he could inspect and make lists of what he was interested in before the auction. I was bored out of my mind and was mindlessly opening and closing drawers of the furniture. There was one large armoire that was full of the owner's personal items, canceled checks, bills, etc. Then I opened the bottom drawer. It was full of old blood-stained lingerie. Not a little bit stained, like completely covered in old brown blood and crumpled up like stuffed in there. Most of it was white or light-colored, so it was very obvious. I slammed the drawer shut, ran, and got my father. He thought I was being dramatic and came to look at it. Upon seeing it, he looked alarmed and found the auction house owner. Very quickly, 5 large, strong-looking men appeared and very quietly and quickly removed the entire armoire off the floor and into the back somewhere. I never found out anything further about it, but I thought about it for a long time. I wish I had remembered the names on those canceled checks and bills, but at the time I had much more on my mind, and cell phones didn't have cameras like they do now. Anyhow, that's my creepy memory. I'm a fairly recently divorced female, 49, who decided to try out some dating apps. I went on a few dates with mixed results, however, this one really freaked me out. I matched with him, a 50-year-old male. We texted, spoke on the phone briefly, and made plans for a lunch date. The restaurant was in a well-populated, busy area. He got there a few minutes before me and was sloppily chowing down on chips and salsa as I walked up. As soon as I sat down, he gave me a creepy smile. His eyes widened and he said, "Oh." It made me uncomfortable. Red flag number 1. I should have listened to my gut and left then. He had a drink in front of him and immediately asked if I wanted a margarita. When I told him I didn't drink, he seemed very disappointed. He rudely asks the waiter for another drink. Red flag number 2, rude, disrespectful to waitstaff. We started talking about jobs, family, hobbies, etc. When I mention I used to be a social worker, he gets an angry and accusatory look on his face and says, "Well, my daughter's in jail." Red flag number 3. I don't know how to react and say, "I'm sorry to hear that." His face immediately changes. He smiles and says, "That's okay." Red flag number 4. He continues to order 2 more drinks while being rude to the waitstaff and making a comment about how they probably don't speak English. As the date is coming to an end, he tells me he wants to see me again. I told him I didn't feel like we clicked and I wasn't interested. He continues to insist, despite my protests, and says he can take me out on his boat. Red flag number 5. I told him it appears that he doesn't hear the word no too often. He gets aggravated. We pay, leave, and walk out. We are now on the sidewalk, and as I say goodbye, he leans over to kiss me. I hold my hand up and tell him that I'm not interested. He angrily looks me in the eyes and says, "No, you are going to kiss me." He is 10 inches taller than me and outweighs me by at least 75 pounds. I start walking away. He grabs my shoulder. I pull away and say, "What the fuck? Leave me alone," and jump in my car, parked close to the front of the restaurant. My head was spinning. I pulled out to look in my rearview mirror and notice he's getting into his car. It was parked behind me. The whole way home, I was looking in my mirror to make sure he wasn't following me, and he wasn't. All I could think of was that if he was willing to behave that way on a busy street in broad daylight, what would he act like if we were alone or in a more secluded area or on his boat? I immediately deleted him and reported him to the app. This happened a week ago. I just woke up, did my everyday morning routine, and watched some TV. Eventually, I thought of calling my friend to hang out. When I called him, he said he was busy, and so I just moved on with my day, kinda disappointed. After that, the next day, I thought of calling him again. We usually hang out every day, so that's why it's kinda weird he didn't come. This time, however, he didn't answer at all. I got some voice messages from him later that same day, and they were all saying that he got kidnapped or something like that. I was super worried and literally didn't know what to do, so I did what any other person would do, and that is call the cops. The cops started investigating, and they went over to his house, but they found nothing. Eventually, after some time, I got a call from him, so I answered. It was someone else on the phone. I talked to the person, and they said, they have my friend and that they want money in exchange for him. Basically any kidnapping that got shown in the movies, at least. I, of course, believed him and went over to the police to see if they could help me. In the call, the guy told me that I needed $5,000 and also that I needed to show up in a specific location. I told the police the location and the demands, and turns out the location was some house. The police went in to find out that my friend and his brother were doing this all along. They got a $4,000 fine for this, and they were pretty lucky they didn't get jail time or even a higher fine. After that, I blocked my friend on social media and deleted his contact from my phone and blocked his number. Everyone got super scared, and turns out it was just some sick joke. Be careful, guys, with who you choose to be your friend. To start, I was 10 years old at the time, and back then my grandparents used to own a whole apartment complex, and the leasing office was attached to our house in the complex. So this is where I spent most of my childhood. My grandmother would run the office, and my grandfather would do all the physical labor around with the other workers. I spent a lot of time in the complex riding my bike, walking my Jack Russell, playing in the creeks behind the trees, like normal kid stuff, nothing crazy. I always felt safe around there, and everyone knew me as the owner's grandchild. Certain parts of these memories get a little foggy as I get older, so I can't remember every incident, but I remember enough to know this man. Something just wasn't right with him. When my grandmother first leased the apartment to this man, I never even knew until I actually met him. The first time I met him, I was walking around the complex, doing nothing in particular but minding my business, and I see him. He approaches me and begins to make small talk, and me being friendly always spoke back. He mentioned how he just moved in. His apartment is super cool, and he doesn't mind if me and my friends ever want to come over. Didn't think anything of it at the time and agreed. But things just started to progress the more I'd see him around. Eventually I knew something wasn't right. The next time I met him, I was walking around the entrance of the apartment complex, and to add, Mercer Community County College was right behind the apartment complex, so I used to travel over there, and you could cut through to the college by the entrance of the apartments. I was only over there because the overhead bridge that looks down into the creek was there, and I used to enjoy peeking over and seeing the fish swim around. Well, once I was done looking, I turned around, and there he was, in the walk-through of the apartments and the college, peeing into the bushes. He turns towards me, exposing himself, and apologizes for me seeing him like this. Of course, as a 10-year-old, your brain doesn't process things as easily, so I told him it was okay and walked away. He just stood there and reminded me about the apartment, and that was the end of it. I went home. Now, he started getting really creepy because the last two encounters I very clearly remember were the final straw to it all, and little 10-year-old me started realizing this wasn't okay. I was walking my dog Buddy one day, and he sees me again and approaches me. He asked if he could pet the dog. I was hesitant but agreed because my dog is very friendly and I never taught him to be mean. He crouched down to pet him, and his penis fell out of the side of his shorts, and this was when I realized he wasn't okay. He sat there petting my dog and groping himself very visibly for me to see. I was appalled. I honestly didn't know what to do, and alarms were raising in my head. I just stared at what he was doing, and he asked me what I liked to do, if I'd like to come over and play games with him. I just told him, one day, and told him I better get going so I can finish walking the dog. The final encounter, I had my best friend, who was 10 at the time, and my sister, who was 3, over at the house with me, and we decided to take the dog for a walk. He was fun to walk with, very hyper, and would drag you if you let him. We were walking in the backyard of some apartments, and lo and behold, he appears, almost like he knew we were there, like he was watching us. He began to casually talk, complimenting my dog and asking us if we wanted to see his dog. My little sister agreed and walked a little closer as he pulled out his phone. I was fooled for a second and thought maybe he really does have a dog. He crouched down next to my sister and started showing photos. As I got closer, I realized he was showing nude photos of him and his dog. Then I realized he was groping himself and had exposed himself through his shorts again. He was too close to my baby sister for comfort, and it made me very uncomfortable. He could have snatched her and ran if he really wanted to, and I always think about that. I was in a state of shock as I realized he was inviting us over again. Best friend realized this was creepy as well, and we just exchanged looks. I knew I needed to get us out of there, so I bent down to pet my dog, and I clipped his leash, knowing he'd dart away at an intense speed, and he did just as I planned. We yelled, "The dog's loose!" grabbed my sister and noped the fuck out of there and left him exactly where he remained, just staring. We ran home in tears, telling my grandfather everything I experienced since the day he moved in. I felt horrible knowing I let it escalate so long to the point others around me were exposed to it. The cops were called, he was arrested on spot, and we had to tell everything to child investigators, cops, the news. It was a lot, and after he was gone, reality set in, and so did the trauma. I swear that dog saved us and got us out of there, and I miss him every day because if I didn't have him, I wouldn't have known what to do. I just think more so about what would have happened if I fell for going to his apartment, or even worse, if he got his hands on a child that was 10 times more gullible than me. The fucked up part is he only stayed in jail for the weekend until his family bonded him out, and if you're reading this, Giovanni, rot in hell, you creep. Update. Posting this made me search on him a little more. He's still alive, unfortunately. He moved the next state over to Pennsylvania, and his address and phone number are public. Apparently he's a mechanic now, as well. A little backstory leading up to this meeting. I grew up in a shady area and would rarely leave home after 7 to 8 p.m. as it was considered dangerous. Going into high school, I got a pit bull. He was a gentle giant who loved everyone and everything. He had some protection work training before he joined our family, but as he was getting older, he retired and I took him home with me. So back to the story. I was, at this time, 17-year-old female, short, blonde, but very aware of my size. But having a big, scary dog, I finally felt safe walking alone, and on that very night I had set out to take a longer walk as my dog, let's call him Meatball, really needed to run off some energy. I took him to the woods near my home, and we walked along a gravel path that was partly lit. It was around 11 p.m. and quite dark outside. As we walked, I became aware of the fact that there really wasn't anyone else around. We walked for about 10 to 15 minutes before a man turned up behind us. We continued to walk, and I notice he is taking the same turns as me and Meatball. I sped up, feeling my heart beating in my chest. Meatball, who normally spent his time sniffing at the end of the leash, was now also very aware of the situation. He had slowed down and gotten so close to my leg with full focus on this man. I started turning at every turn I could, and the man followed even though we were now walking in circles. He started getting closer and closer to us as I am now sure he is following us. I remember something my father once told us. Never let anyone follow you, as you're most vulnerable from behind. If you get in a situation where you can force your stalker to pass you, do. I stopped, grabbed onto Meatball's leash, and leaned back in the leash, acting as if I have to put my entire body weight in holding him back. Now I am aware that I at this point in my life looked small and weak, but as my father is an old veteran, I could fight before I could walk, and even holding Meatball back was not a task, as I was a lot stronger than I looked. Well, I called out, trying to sound as naive as I could, hoping that if I did have to fight, I would surprise him with my strength. "Excuse me, my dog really does not like people, and I can't really hold him back when he lunges. If I step to the side, could you pass us so I have a chance at holding him back?" As I say this, Meatball starts barking, growling, and snapping towards the man, who has now stopped. He looks me up and down, stares at Meatball, and turns around, not saying a word. He left quickly, and I called my parents and asked them to meet me, as I now realized he could easily hide anywhere on our way back. My dad showed up only a few minutes later, baseball bat in hand. Nothing really happened, but after being followed by this man at every turn I took for at least 35 minutes, I know this could have ended really badly if I had not had Meatball or my dad close by. When I was 11, my younger sister and I were at the mall with my mom. We were waiting for my dad to join us. My mom noticed that a man was fixated on my sister, who was about 4 at the time. He wouldn't take his eyes off her, and he followed us through the mall. This was pre-cell phones, and I was scared by how scared my mom was by this guy's constant fixation on my sister. It was like he was in a trance, and then he started to rub his pants in an obvious spot. Suddenly, my dad appeared, and my mom quickly told him about our ordeal for the past hour, and the man turned around, and he walked into the bathroom to avoid any confrontation he had coming. Well, that didn't stop my dad. He followed him into the bathroom, and when he emerged, he told us that we had to quickly leave, and I noticed that he was a bit disheveled. But the real telltale bit was that he had 2 hands full of bloody knuckles. My daughter was about 8 or 9 at the time. We'll call her Dee for daughter. My mom loved taking her to this local amusement park where we live, and it had rides, rock climbing walls, etc. On this particular day, Dee was climbing all the walls. She would hit the bell on the first try at the top, climb down, and go to a more difficult section. That's when my mom noticed them. A couple in their 30s or 40s whispering to each other and looking at Dee. So my mom told Dee they were going somewhere different and moved to another section of the park. No more than 5 minutes later, there they were again, staring at Dee and whispering to each other. They left again, only to see the couple again getting closer to Dee. At that point, my mom was becoming paranoid and decided to leave. That's when they approached them both. They were trying to talk to Dee, and luckily my mom has an instinct with creepy people and snagged Dee and put her behind her, and this is what she told them. "What business do you have talking to an 8-year-old, you fucking weird-ass perverts? You didn't think I'd seen you following us all around the park, staring at my granddaughter and whispering to each other? I'm calling the police." At that point, they left in an absolute hurry, didn't even give an explanation. Thanks, Mom. Who knows what their intentions were, but I'm glad we never got to find out. Glad to have such an observant mom in this situation. Edit. And she did report it and gave descriptions of the people just in case a kid went missing. Hey folks, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you haven't subscribed already, please do subscribe and hit the like button, as they're both very helpful to my growth here on YouTube. We're almost at 500 subscribers, and I'd love to get there. If you have a suggestion or simply want to say hello, please leave a comment below. I love to hear what you guys have to say. I post as often as I can, 1 to 3 times a week. Sorry, it's been a little while. I had a lot going on, but hopefully I'm back. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it beyond measure. And until next time, be good.